What's the one thing people check every day? The weather. This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is legendary weatherman Lloyd Lindsay Young. It all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, it is the interview portion of our show, and I am delighted to bring on the show for the first time a legend in weather and weather broadcasting and broadcasting overall. His name is Lloyd Lindsay Young. When I was back in New York City and New Jersey area, Lloyd was a foundation. He was a rock at WOR TV, Channel 9, did the weather every night. And you can be sure that you recall him if you're from the area by his signature, hello, whatever your town was. So I'm delighted to bring him on the show. Welcome to Guys Radio, Lloyd Lindsay Young.
Hello. It's a pleasure to be here. Brilliant. I'm so happy about this. I ought to be investigating. Good to be here.
Fantastic. Well, Lloyd, I think to start out with, why don't you tell people, because weather, people watch the weather all the time. It seems to me that the weather forecasting is getting better and better, but you started way back in 1961, and you had a really interesting path to become the legend that you are. Tell us about how you kind of got into weather. Was it something that you had planned? Was it something you had studied for? Did you kind of fall into it? Because I think every weather person's story is a little bit different, and some are meteorologists, others aren't. Tell everybody about where you got your start, Lloyd.
Well, first of all, I went to Los Angeles City College. I grew up in LA, and I would lie in bed and listen to disc jockeys on KRLA and KFW. I really started out as a radio disc jockey, and weather was kind of a hobby. So, like a lot of people, were kind of like baseball players. I had to go to the low minor leagues to get on the air. So my first job was out in the Mojave Desert, Mojave, California. And, if you don't mind working for $60 a week, and if you don't mind using an outhouse for a bathroom, and if you don't mind reading the Los Angeles Times as your news wire, it was a great job. Well, that lasted 3 months, and I made it to Bakersfield, which was a step up, at least from where I was. But I spent 10 years in radio, knocking around places like Tucson, Arizona, Butte, Montana. Oh, my God, my interest in weather. One morning I woke up in Butte, it's 38 below zero. That's not wind chill. That's the real deal. So how did I get into weather? Well, in Salt Lake City, I had a friend that was a meteorologist at the NBC affiliate. His name, Mark Eubank. And I would call in, weather objects. I'd say, hey, Mark, this is Lloyd out in South Salt Lake. I have 9 inches of snow. He'd put it on the air. Well, anyway, after a few years of being buddies with him, he said, Lloyd, a friend of mine, a guy named Mike Fairborn, is leaving Idaho Falls to go to Portland, Oregon. So I'd had 10 years in radio, and I drove up to Idaho Falls, KIFI television, with my family, and believe it or not, I got there, and they said, Lloyd, tomorrow, can you go on here at 5 o'clock, and we're going to give you a live television audition. Nervous, I didn't sleep at all the night before, and by golly, I went on, half-hour newscast. Hard to believe, but the program director said, how soon can you be here? So even though Salt Lake was marked at 50 in population ranking, I went up to Idaho Falls at market 169 for really just a piddly $100 a month more. That was my launch into television in 1971. So they hired me just based on my enthusiasm for weather and the fact I'd been a radio disc jockey for 10 years. So that's really how weather started.
Now, how did you, Lloyd, interesting, how did you learn about weather? Did you take some courses? Did you just listen to the other weather people, or what did you do? Because you
I'll tell
really
you exactly.
you really are terrific and have been terrific at forecasting and really delivering the weather news.
Mm-hmm.
How did you learn? How did you learn that?
Here's how I did it. I went to the National Weather Service office. All of my off time, weekends, nights, I'd sit there with the meteorologists and I picked their brains. And I learned more in a couple of days of hanging out at the National Weather Service office and being friends with these guys that worked there than I think any college might have been able to teach me in a year. I was obsessed with the weather. And like I said, I'd spend weekends there. I'd get off the air at 10:30 at night from my broadcast. I'd go out and sit there till 3, 4 in the morning asking a million questions. And I also hung out in towers that communicate with airplanes. So really, it was a matter, and not only in Idaho, even in New York, I would go to the National Weather Service offices at Newark International Airport, and I just would hang out with these people who were so well educated. And it was sort of not only a hobby and an obsession. Well, I'll tell you, let's go back to my childhood. So I grew up in Los Angeles, and I had a broken leg when I was 6 years old. And they had a rare snowfall, believe it or not, an inch or two of snow in Hollywood. And I couldn't go out with the other kids and play in the snow. I said, Mommy, what is that? It's snow, Lloyd. So I think my interest in weather came from childhood, but I never really, okay, when I started out in radio, in a million years, I never thought I'd end up on television in radio. But it was just circumstances that, I did an on-air live audition in Idaho Falls and spent 6 years there.
Now, what was the weather like in, you mentioned it get cold sometimes, but they have 4 seasons in Idaho, and you're from Los Angeles. How did you learn about Idaho's weather?
Oh, how did I learn about it? I froze my you-know-what off. They'd send me out on remotes. So, I would print up wind chill charts, because here's the thing. When the weather is blowing hard, if the temperature is 20, but the wind is blowing 30, 40 miles an hour, the chill factor is 10 or 15 below. So I actually printed up wind chill charts. By the way, I went to over 100 schools there and talked to children. But here in a small market like that, I'd take my own camera. I'd even go to Wyoming, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, places like that. And if you you film children, you said, hey, Sally and John, you're going to be on Channel 8 tonight. That was they go home and say, Mommy, Daddy, we're going to be on television tonight. So in a small market like that, that's why I helped propel that television station to a #1 ranking. It was a 3-station market. So that's how I think feeling it and experiencing it, and it can be punishing. It can even be deadly if you're not careful.
How did you then, did you do the forecast yourself, or were you handed the information and you basically delivered it in Idaho?
Sometimes I disagreed with the National Weather Service. I'd make my own forecast. The National Weather Service is a government agency, and sometimes they get a little bit lazy, and that's a whole other story. But sometimes I'd call them up and I say, hey, you predicted this and this, and you revise it. We'll do it in 3 hours. I said, I'm doing it right now. You guys do this forecast. They're not perfect. Hey, here's the thing, but they're nice people, but their jobs are secure. If you work for the government, unless you show up to work intoxicated, you're not going to get fired. If my ratings went down, they show me the door. That's how television works.
Well, it might be changing now if you've been watching the news. And I'm sure you are. So we'll see what happens with that. But so you were in Idaho Falls, then you went to Evansville, Indiana, and then you went back to Idaho Falls. What happened
here's
there?
What happened. So I had nothing more to prove in Idaho Falls. So I don't know. I heard about an opening at WFIE television, the NBC affiliate. Evansville is in southern Indiana, right on the Ohio River. The television station was great, but I did not like the area. I did not like the heat and humidity. This was 1978. Believe it or not, the KKK was very active in that area. I'm not a Southern boy. And I think that's the biggest. I mean, even though the television station was fine, I just detested that area. I didn't like it. So to make a long story short, I had a 3-year contract. I called my old boss back, and I said, Leon, I made a terrible mistake. Can you make room for me back in Idaho Falls? He said, sure, Lloyd, we'll work you in. So we went back. Now, Evansville was the 89th market, so it's sort of a step down, but it's the smartest move I ever made because that led to San Francisco, and I'd like to explain how that came. Quite a story.
Okay, so you went from Evansville back to Idaho Falls, and then
Correct.
you got the call. You got your big break in San Francisco. Tell us what happened.
Well, it's an amazing story. It's something when you're sitting in market 169, keep in mind San Francisco is number 5. So one day the telephone rings. Lloyd, pick up line 3. This gentleman comes on the line. He says, this is Jim Osborne, general manager of KGO Television in San Francisco. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a put on. He said, where have you been? I said, oh, I've been in Indiana. He said, oh, we've missed you. What happened is he would go golfing with his teenage boys in Sun Valley, Idaho. And his boys would say, hey, Dad, look at this guy. Look at this guy. He's wild. Look at him. And essentially, in his teenage boys got him interested. And I thought it was a put on at first. He called the second time and he said, we'd like to get you to San Francisco. So I said, all right, I'll fly down on a Saturday. And I had a son named George. I still do, but George was 13. George has never seen. Can I bring him? Sure, bring him along. So here's how I knew I had the gig. It's really interesting. So we arrived at SFO, San Francisco Airport, and we take a taxi, and the cab gets a flat on the way to the end. This is the interview of a lifetime, and the darn taxi gets a flat. I'm an hour late. I apologize. So it's so funny. Here's how I knew I had the gig. He says, what's your son going to do today? I say, he likes to play video games. So he says, just a minute. He leaves the room. I don't know where he got a hold of this cash. He hands my son. Now, keep in mind, this is 1981. He hands George, my son, $200 in cash and says, here, go play video games. At that moment, I knew I had the job. I mean, there was just no doubt. So anyway, they put us up at a beautiful hotel in downtown San Francisco. He says, you'll be hearing from me. 5 days later, he calls. He said, all right, Lloyd, we want to offer you a 5-year contract. And truthfully, it was 4.5 times. I think it was $90,000 a year. At the time, I was making about $18,000. So it's kind of like a baseball player in the low minors getting called up to the major leagues. My wife at the time was shocked. Mm-hmm. So that was my big break in the world of broadcast.
Let me ask you this. My special guest is legendary weatherman, weather broadcaster, radio, TV legend, Lloyd Lindsay Young. We're talking about his time in San Francisco, getting his big break there. You must have been very surprised, obviously, though very confident in your skills. Did the general manager of the San Francisco station tell you why he was so interested in you to offer you a 4-year contract?
He didn't specify why, but there's a little more to the story. I was hired as the weekend weather person.
Okay.
But still, it's a major market. The salary was great. And my job the other 3 days per week was to go out in the field and do live shots. Fine. But I ran into a problem the very first night I was on the air. This is hard to believe. So I go on the air. I do the early news. I do the 11 o'clock news. The meteorologist there was a guy named Pete Giddings, and he calls me from Lake Tahoe. He says, Lloyd, if you ever do a broadcast like that again, you won't be working here. I said, well, Pete, I don't work for you. I work for the general manager and news director. He realized, I guess, that I might have been a threat to, I wasn't out to get his job. I was just doing my thing. you
And
know.
this was the weekday weather person?
Yeah, the chief meteorologist.
Okay.
Yes.
Why did he tell
So
you that? What did he have? What was his problem with your broadcast?
because I think he perceived me because I did my shtick, and he was a serious meteorologist. I
Okay.
think he perceived me as a threat. I wasn't trying to get his job. I was just doing my thing. Well, anyway, it created a lot of tension over the next couple of years. So I was a little bit naive. I didn't realize that my 5-year contract had 1-year windows. Well, anyway, in the meantime, I had a newspaper column with the San Francisco Examiner. I had a radio gig at KFRC Radio, one of the big rockers. I was getting a lot of attention in the Bay Area. And the more I got, the more it perturbed him. So after 2 years, he went to the powers to be, and they had 28 years invested in him. And he basically said to Tim or me, so I was let go. I continued to do radio, and it was a big media. I mean, I did a lot of interviews. In those days, newspapers were big, and I thought, well, I'll keep doing radio, keep doing my newspaper column. So the brother of the general manager at WOR TV was following us, and they were starting a new 8 o'clock newscast in New York. And I get this, I'd hired an agent in the meantime. And he calls me up and he said, Lloyd, how would you like to go to New York? Okay, no, really. So hard to believe, but we packed it up. They paid all the moving expenses. At the time, my son was 19. He chose to stay back in California. I have 2 daughters. And off we launched in the New York City. That was 1983. And I was there for 12 years at WOR.
So WOR, for those who are not familiar with the New York market the way I am, WOR has its offices in New Jersey, right? And
Right, well, New York to begin with when I first started.
Okay, you were in the city. So where, for WOR?
Yes.
Oh, before they moved out.
Correct. We moved to Secaucus
Right.
2 years later because the station's licensed to New Jersey.
Okay. And what did you learn from kind of going to the big leagues in New York from your past experience?
Well, the weather was much more interesting because New York gets it all, including I covered a hurricane. No, I think, what did I learn? Well, I learned that the first night I said to myself, listen, I'm doing the same thing I've done all along. It'll either work or it won't. And the first night I went on the air, I yelled, hello, Harlem. And I'll tell you what, the black people loved me for it. But no, I did my thing. You know, and the weather was more challenging.
I lived in Harlem, so it's multiracial.
Oh, okay.
Just so you know, I lived in Harlem for 10 years.
No kidding.
Yes.
That's interesting. Well, all right. But, you know, I love the names like Hocus,
right.
Weehawken, and you know, you lived in New Jersey. You know,
yes,
some of the towns have funny names there. You know, we were also a superstation. You know, we were carried on Eastern Microwave all over the United States. So I would get fan mail from oh God, everywhere, Florida, even we went on vacation in Puerto Rico, and I got hola Lloyd, you know, because we were carried in San Juan. So,
and you really seem to connect with the audience. How did you? You really seem to connect with the audience there in New York. You think part of your kind of, forgive me, quirky personality and shtick that you did, as you say, really was something that, you know, New Yorkers like a personality. So it seems like you fit right in.
And there were pioneers that had. How about Willard Scott? He did a lot of shtick, for example, and even Al Roker, great guy. And so, yeah, you know what? Here's what I learned about New York audiences. They either love you or hate you. There's no in between. And, you know, I mean, and fortunately, most people like what I did. I'll tell you who like, I appealed in San Francisco also. I appealed to the working class, to the firefighters, to the policemen, people like that. I was Joe Lunchbox appeal. Middle class people, rich, hoity-toity people, even in the Bay Area, didn't want anything to do with it.
Okay.
But I think they appealed to the common man more. You know?
Okay. My special guest on Guys Radio, legendary weatherman and broadcaster Lloyd Lindsay Young. Since you've worked in all these different markets and been successful, what, in terms of delivering a weather forecast, what do you need to do to make it work and have you say, the working person, really connected with you? You're thinking about a forecast coming up. How do you deliver it? How do you prepare? How do you lay it out there?
Well, first of all, you have to prepare your graphics. Your radar, your satellite picture, your jet stream map. One thing that I did that my fans appreciated, and the weather can get serious in New York City. When the weather was serious, the shtick went away. The people that really appreciated me fully, for example, if we were under a heavy snow warning or a blizzard warning, I got very serious. Or severe weather, like severe thunderstorms and even an isolated tornado, I became very serious. When the weather, okay, here was my philosophy. A lot of the news is depressing. So if the weather is quiet, I wanted to offer a little bit of levity, a little bit of entertainment for the broadcast. And I think people enjoyed that. But when the weather was serious, like if there was a blizzard warning, I would lead off the show. And the producer would say, "Hey, Lloyd, how much time do you need?" So, I learned that even way back in Evansville, Indiana, they get a lot of tornadoes. It's so funny. Back to Indiana, I would interrupt soap operas, and people would call up and complain. I said, "Lady, I'm only trying to save your life. I'm sorry I interrupted." I learned that when the weather was serious, I was serious.
Now, how did you get, when you were in the New York market, how did you get your weather information? Surely you had the support of a staff somehow who would pull together. They had a forecast for you, I guess. You developed it, you fine-tuned it on your own, but I got to think you had some resources. How did you work?
Of course, the National Weather Service constantly on the wire services constantly puts it. You can get it on a computer or the Associated Press. We had a weather wire. Basically, you look at the National Weather Service product, and if you agree with it, fine. But, so to carry it a step further, I had a weather radio at home, even when I wasn't working, and that was directly hooked up with the National Weather Service. So I was so obsessed with weather. Not only that, I had equipment at home like rain gauges, barometers, outdoor, indoor thermometers. And so I think just getting the information from the National Weather Service and the FAA for aviation, because even aviation, as plays a major role in weather. So I would fine tune the forecast. And as I mentioned earlier, there were times I thought they were wrong. I mean, and
what would you do? What would you do, Lloyd, in that type of situation? They're giving you a forecast. You know that they're wrong. How do you handle it on air?
Well, I don't even mention they're wrong. I just give my version of the forecast. Okay. Now, I want to admit another thing. Weather is not a perfect science, and I've blown a few forecasts in my day. I mean, I'd call for 6 inches of snow, and people would end up shoveling 6 inches of partly cloudy. I mean, my batting average was good, though. I think I was in the 90, 95. I wasn't perfect. I mean, Mother Nature can be tricky. I'll tell you another thing that I'd go through. Let's say I put out a heavy snow warning for the next day. I'd get home in New Jersey, and I couldn't sleep that night. Where are the flakes? I'd look out the bedroom window. 3 o'clock in the morning. My wife would say, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm waiting for the snow." I mean, I'd get so excited about it. I had insomnia. Where the heck is the sun? Now it would finally come. It could be frustrating at times. Might come 3 hours later. But so where did I get it? Well, I mean, I think that explains it. I mean,
yep, you're passionate. You're passionate about the weather, which is fantastic. So you mentioned hurricane before. Tell us about some of the biggest storms you handled and maybe the craziest weather you've ever handled on air.
All right. Well, Hurricane Gloria hit Long. We went with our remote unit to Long Island, and the winds were gusting to 90 miles an hour. And I literally had to hang on to the satellite truck. If I wasn't holding on to the truck, it would have blown me over, literally blown me over. I've covered tornadoes in Indiana. Scary. I mean, Don, I would cruise, live shot. Oh, there's a twister out there over that field and stuff like that. But I'll tell you what was hard for me personally. They'd say, all right, Lloyd, we got a heavy snowstorm and we want you out in the field. Get out on the New Jersey Turnpike. We're doing a live shot. Well, it would be 10 o'clock at night. The wind chill factor would be 20 below zero. So what I would do is originally I'd go back to the station. I would take my personal vehicle, follow the satellite truck, and sit in the car till the last possible moment. Meanwhile, I'd get a hold of my wife and I'd say, Barbara, draw a hot bath, because if you're standing out there in 10, 20 below zero, it's punishing. It's punishing. And that's one of the hardest things I ever had to do, because you get so chilled. So one night I got home and I was just curious. I stuck an oral thermometer in my mouth and it registered 94.5 degrees. And I think I had mild hypothermia. I sat in a hot bathtub, and about a half hour later, I got my body temperature back to normal. I mean, even the news reporters would tell you getting out in what I call Arctic-like cold is painful, literally painful. But there's that. And another thing, if we had a major snowstorm, I'd put in all kinds of long hours. I had to do updates every hour. If the snow was really bad, even in Secaucus, they'd put us up in a hotel. So there were days I'd work till maybe midnight, and they'd want me back at 8 in the morning doing all day cut-ins, updates. So, people think weather people, they're only on the air 3 minutes. Well, if the weather gets bad, you work your what off, because the public wants it.
Now, you mentioned some of the other weather forecasters, legends in the New York market. Was there like a fraternity among the weathermen and women there, or is it everybody? It's like anything else, where some people kind of have a little bit of a community and others don't. What was your sense? Because that's really the top market.
Well, I had
you don't have to get into like naming names in terms of like if somebody you didn't like, but I mean, was there a fraternity? Did you have some buddies in there?
Hey, listen, yes, there was. I mean, I can mention people I liked. There was a gentleman named John Coleman from Good Morning America. He only made it to New York for a year, but he started the Weather Channel. I mentioned Al Roker, a great guy. I never looked at a competitor of somebody I didn't like. Everybody had their own style, but basically, I would run into, sometimes, believe it or not, I'd go out to to a nice restaurant, happen once in a while, run, there's so-and-so. And even the news people, the same thing. I mean, obviously, New York City is very competitive. I mean, I would have news anchors from WPIX or some of the others say, hey, Lloyd, you do a great job. I mean, it was friendly. There was no dislike going on that I know.
Now, what was your kind of favorite time in terms of weather forecasting? What was like your sweet spot in your career?
Well, to be honest, I think I have to go back getting to San Francisco, because, I always kind of compare it to baseball. For example, in baseball, if you get drafted by a major league team, your chances of making it to the Mets or the Yankees or the Dodgers is maybe 1 in 14. Well, in the world of broadcasting, your chances of getting into a top 10 market, I would venture to say, are probably 1 in 100. So for every person working in San Francisco or New York, there's thousands of people working in Wichita, Kansas, and Billings, Montana, etc. So I feel that getting that big break into San Francisco. Oh, I loved getting to New York. Don't misunderstand me. But to me, the turning point was getting into the major leagues, and San Francisco's definitely the major leagues.
Now, when you were working as a weatherman, how do the other folks, or is it different by market? How typically in a newsroom, how do they treat the weather person? I mean, you're really a glue because you got to be there every night. You probably can pinch hit in certain areas if the sportscaster has a stomach ache or something. I've seen it done both ways. But how do they treat you as the weatherman when you have these serious reporters going out there and wanting to get their face on TV?
Well, I think most of them were very nice. Once in a while, without mentioning names, there'd be a few people that were jealous. I'm a reporter and I gotta work 8 hours to get a story on there. All you have to do is put a few graphics together and stand in front of a camera for 3 minutes. So I think there was a small degree of jealousy because, okay, to be honest, a weather anchor makes more money than the news reporter. We were in the same category as a news anchor or a sports anchor. There's people I really admired, like Warner Wolf in New York, for instance, a great sportscaster. I mean, there were so many people in New York that I admired immensely. But the weather person is perceived to have it easy. And I will admit, in nice weather, my job was easier than a beat reporter having to spend hours in the field, coming back, getting his story edited and voice tracked. So compared to a news reporter, the job is a lot easier.
Okay, my special guest on Guys Radio, legendary weatherman and broadcaster Lloyd Lindsay Young. I guess a lot, and we're talking about being a weather person and some of the challenges of that. I think when people watch the weather, at least I ask myself, how do they know when they stand in front of that map and they're doing the green screen? How do you learn how to work with that? Could you explain what a green screen is?
Sure.
And how do you learn to work with it?
Absolutely. It's called a chroma key. So you can't, green screen. I could not wear any green clothing, so it would be out. All right, you look at the camera. First of all, we had 3 cameramen, but you look at the camera and there's a monitor in the camera. You can see your graphic. You turn to the left, you've got a monitor to your left. So, the other thing I wanted to mention before I forget, I use bizarre weather pointer. That was a gimmick I used. I want to tell you about a few of those. You learn to the right, you lean to the right rather, you see another. So you're looking at your graphics. And it's a matter of, I learned that way back in Idaho. That was easy to figure out. One of the things I did, and I wanted to get this in, is I used a lot of props. So it all started. And I want to explain how the hello started. I don't know what got into me, but one night in Idaho, I just, for the heck of it, I yelled, "Hello, Jackson Hole," and a bunch of people. I don't know why I did it. Then I told Pocatello and some back. No. But back to the pointers. I used some strange weather pointers. The most daring one I ever did, Arner got fired over to get ratings, in, where was it? Oh, in Evansville, Indiana. The news director and we decided it was a stripper that was an acrobat. So she came into the station with a bikini. She had high-heeled shoes on, and she stood on her head, and I would take her this heel and point it to Arkansas. And over here, I mean, there was nothing. I mean, she was covered, but it was considered very risque. The most bizarre weather pointer I ever used, and I was so naive. In Idaho, I got what appeared to be a beautiful select cane, a long cane. And all of a sudden, the phones light up and the ranchers start calling in. Is that idiot really using that? You know what it was? It was a shellacked bull's penis. And I thought it was just a cane. I had no idea what I had. So I collected thousands of weather pointers in my career, like miniature Statues of Liberty or miniature Empire State Buildings, and anything I could think of.
Wow,
that's another shtick.
That's amazing. So let's get serious for a moment. It seems like the weather seems to be changing now, and we're getting a lot of kind of unpredictable things happening. I think there was an earthquake in Boston the other day,
Right. That has
3.8.
nothing to do with weather.
Okay, well, it's dotted
Yeah, I know
line
what you're saying.
connected. So what do you think about global warming and how it affects the weather, or if it
I think
does?
it's real. I think it's real. I think it's very real. Climate change, and I don't mean it has nothing to do with politics. It's science. Look what happened in Los Angeles recently. My hometown, it looked like a war zone. Those horrible fires. Uh, the planet is heating up. The United States in 2024 had the warmest mean temperature, average temperature, than in the history of the U.S. Mm-hmm. Las Vegas, Phoenix, Sacramento, near where I live, hottest summers ever. Look what happened down along the Gulf Coast. Heavy snow. New Orleans, Houston. Let's go to Florida and snowboard. I mean, Pensacola had 11 inches of snow. These things, the weather records go back to the late 1800s. This has never, ever happened. So the planet is heating up. There's no doubt about it. Glaciers are melting in the Arctic. So, you know, people say, well, that might have happened 500 years ago. Well, who cares? I can tell you the weather records go back to the late 1800s, and there's never been anything quite like it. What's going on? Even Antarctica is warm. So global warming is a real thing, and I don't care if you extremes. I mean, we've had more extremes. There was even tornadoes in January. Who ever heard of that? Look what happened with Helene in Asheville, North Carolina. A hurricane all the way into North Carolina. So bizarre, unprecedented things are happening.
Have you heard about, in your conversations with other people in the business, about the possibility of and the technology that could impact, for positive reasons, impacting the weather technology?
Not specifically. Not really. No, I haven't.
Okay. All right. What, looking back, what was your most memorable thing about your career as a weatherman? What did you learn?
You know,
what did you learn about people?
Pardon me?
What did you learn about people?
I learned that that people are, how can I put this? People as a whole are very decent. They understand. They're likable. There's always going to be, okay, here's sometimes there's strange, there's people that don't like it. So here's another example. I'm doing a local television show in Idaho Falls. I'm in a grocery store, and this big husky guy, way bigger, picks me up and by my collar, he says, "You so-and-so, you are ruining my sex life." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "My wife insists on staying up till 10:30 at night to watch you, and I need to get to bed early, and she will not come to bed with me till you're done, and you're ruining my life now."
There you go.
You're messing my sex life.
I love it. Okay, Lloyd.
I've learned that in general, people are very nice, but there's exceptions.
Okay. What would be your kind of quick we're running out of time, but a couple of bullet points. What would be your advice for anybody who wants to break in as a weather person?
Be willing to pay your dues. Don't expect, you got to earn, no one gets out of college. I don't care if you have a doctor's degree in meteorology. You got to go out. To this day, you've got to go out and work in the minor leagues and hone your craft. And you got to leave your hometown, because the odds of getting a job, let's say you grow up in St. Louis, the odds of getting a job there are low. You got to be willing to go to Seattle, Walla Walla, Washington, or I don't know, Hagerstown, Maryland, or wherever the job is. You got to go. You got to have, you got to hit the road and go out and prove you can do it at a lower level. Unless your dad owns the television station, you're not starting in New York City.
Fantastic. Lloyd Lindsay Young, my very special guest on Guys Radio. It's great to have a legend on the show. How about, I know as we're kind of moving off, a little hello, Guys Radio audience.
Sure. Hello, guys, radio. Love you.
Thank you so much, Lloyd, for being on the show. You're a legend, and stay healthy.
Well,
and
it's an honor. It's an honor,
well.
and I want to thank you.
It's our pleasure, and thank you so much, Lloyd. God bless you.
Same to you.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys TV and Guys Radio, please support us by subscribing to our channels and platforms. Thank you.